This year I celebrate my 25th anniversary as a brother in the Missionaries of the Precious Blood. During this pandemic, I've had a lot of time to reflect on my life in the congregation. To add to my reflection during these times, I sometimes resort to iconography by looking at the icon of either Jesus or Gasper. The whole purpose to be inspired by the person you're viewing. And as I gaze on the icon of Gasper, I'm reminded of his protest against Napoleon. That is, that time when he said, "I cannot, I must not, I will not." In refusing to take this Napoleonic oath, I see Gasper as both a protester and an activist, you can say, because he had to go to prison for his actions. I also recall the words that Gasper said. He said, "Please, I urge you not to abandon the poor, who are the image of Jesus Christ. So if it were not possible to cultivate all of our different works, let not the most necessary be abandoned." I believe that if Gasper were alive today in the United States at this time, he'd be personally involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. I would venture to say that he would recognize the systemic racism that exists in our country that keeps blacks in economic disparity. And he would shout out a rallying cry to all of us to do something about it. I believe he would want us to do and be about social justice and equality and civil rights for blacks among us. I was born in the 60s and have always had a strong interest in the civil rights movement. I have a strong appreciation for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the team of individuals who worked closely with him in the movement. Someone who I have just as much admiration for is John Lewis, who passed away this last week. He was truly a role model for me in social justice. He was inspired by Dr. King at an early age, and he carried out those social justice principles for 6 decades. He believed in civil rights for everyone. I remember 5 years ago when he advocated for LGBTQ equality and civil rights. Even with his cancer this last week, he was a strong proponent of the Black Lives Matter movement. Ever since his days when he shed blood on the holy ground on that bridge in Selma, Alabama, he has been about what he called good trouble. He encouraged all of us to speak out when we see injustices. That is certainly what he was about in his 30 years plus in Congress, as he was called the person who brought about moral conscience to the House of Representatives. John Lewis, to me, is a modern day icon, a person I respect, and I hope that we all can continue his legacy by calling out racism when we see it and confront it as the social sin that it is in our world, and fight for true equality. John Lewis was one of Dr. King's team of 6, and he carried through on the civil rights movement to the end, and now he passes that baton on to us. And what are we going to do with it? I want to bring a special attention to Gabino Zavala's most recent article in the New Wine Press entitled "The Reality of Racism." It is both informative and at the same time vulnerable, because he shared his life story as it relates to discrimination. Gabino challenges us to take a serious look at white privilege. He gives us several ways to confront racism. Once during this past year, I had the privilege of seeing one of our members confront someone at one of our meetings who had made a racist remark. Now, I went up to him afterwards and said, thanks for having the courage, the bravery to confront that person. I think that's what we need to be about. And this is kind of what I'm agreeing with Gabino in his article. We need to call out racism when we see it in order to change attitudes. The Black Lives Matter movement has brought to light the unfair and unjust suffering of the innocent through racial and economic discrimination and through the denial of human rights. John Lewis fought against this for years, even to the point of bloodshed. As we saw the images of him with blood-stained clothes on television in these past days, we can draw upon our own precious blood spirituality. Those who are followers of Jesus will show the marks of blood upon their clothes. Precious blood spirituality calls us to commitment and ministry in the presence of conflict and confrontation. Sometimes conflict that is repressed and hidden, as we can see in our own society, sometimes with racism. It is the concrete call to solidarity with the poor and those who suffer, to enter into the heart of conflict, especially during this time of racial oppression. Thank you.